Iraq's top religious authority calls on the country's premier to brave tough reforms as protests over government corruption escalate. The UN Security Council adopts a resolution to help identify and punish the perpetrators behind chemical weapons attacks in Syria. And the Daesh terror group abducts over 230 people in Syria's Homs province. Hello there, thanks for joining us. You're watching Al-Ittijah English News with me, Sergeant Preradovic. Our top story tonight takes us to Iraq, where the country's highest religious authority called on the Prime Minister to be more decisive in fighting corruption. During a Friday sermon, the spokesperson for the Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali al-Sistani said that all of Iraq's political blocs must implement reforms.
The Prime Minister is the #1 executive authority in the country and has shown his interest in the demands of the people and commitment to carrying out their demands. What is needed from him is to be more daring and braver in these reforms and not to suffice with some secondary steps which he announced recently. He's also requested to have all the political blocs face their responsibilities and to point out to those who slow down reform, no matter who they are or what position they hold. And he has to overcome the system of quotas for political blocs and sects.
It's the second Friday of protests in the capital Baghdad and across Iraq. Thousands of Iraqis have braved the scorching summer heat to demand an end to government corruption. But what initially started off as a protest against the country's crippling public services sector has now evolved into nationwide demonstrations calling on the dissolution of the Iraqi parliament. Men, women and children from all walks of life gathered at the Liberation Square in central Baghdad, waving Iraqi flags and calling on Iraq's Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi, to sack all corrupt government officials.
This government is just a group with political parties who are looking out for their own interests. They are stealing the country's wealth.
Elsewhere in the country, close to 5,000 people held similar protests in the southern province of Diqar, calling for an end to electricity shortages. For more than 10 years, the government has poured billions of dollars into resolving the problems surrounding power supplies. But with rampant corruption plaguing state institutions, there have been no signs of improvement on the ground.
Let's talk more about this with Ali Al-Dabakh. He's a former Iraqi government spokesperson joining us from Baghdad now. Mr. Dabakh, looking at these protests, one gets the impression that perhaps this could evolve into a much bigger crisis and perhaps turn into a mass uprising against the Iraqi government. Is that a possibility in your view?
I think Abadi needs to show that he is really decisive. He got a full power from His Eminence in order to improve the performance of the government. Since 1 year, there is a disappointment from this performance. Today is a real test for Abadi. I think he's capable if he is willing to do so. I think he got a very huge support, which never have any prime minister before, nor any authorities in Iraq got this. It's an open support. If he really want to improve the quality of the services, the quality of the living standard for the people. Unfortunately, Abadi has inherited a huge corruption problem, deficiencies in the services, and deficiencies in the performance. We can't fully blame him. I think Maliki should be blamed as well for 8 years of wasting billions of dollars. He cannot even solve and fix the problem of the power. While Afghanistan, which is a poor country, they had solved the power problem. Other countries as well, but in Iraq there is a failure. failure in everything. And actually the electricity issue and the power issue, it is the spark which ignites the anger of the people. It is very wide. It is very, for 11 governorate today with a full anger. And I think Abadi, unless he take a real measure, it is open for a bad situation here in the country.
I have to ask, because you were a member of that Maliki government, of course, you must have witnessed corruption on an almost daily basis, if it's so systematic and institutionalized.
Unfortunately, during the past 8 years, Maliki didn't question anyone. Iraq was full of corruption, from the ministers till the smallest member in the government staff. But unfortunately, there was no real measure. There was no proper questioning, no proper accountability, which the people feel that there is a coverage, a political coverage for those who had performed and experienced the corruption. And it become really, as you said, it is institutionalized. And this is the problem. Is not easy for.
All right, technical difficulties there, as you can see, with Mr. Ali Al-Dabakh, former Iraqi government spokesperson, talking to us from Baghdad. Well, staying in Iraq, where the Vice President Osama al-Nujayfi has released the names of 2,000 Iraqis who were executed by the Daesh terror group since militants overran the northern city of Mosul in June of last year. Now, according to local sources, Daesh commanders released the names of those killed in order to have their death certificates issued. For his part, Iraq's vice president called on the government to take very serious steps to liberate the whole of the northern Nineveh province as soon as possible. Daesh captured Mosul, which is Nineveh's provincial capital and Iraq's second city, in June of last year. Meanwhile, the Daesh terror group has abducted more than 200 civilians in Syria's central province of Homs. According to the Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the abductees were taken by Daesh during a sweep through the town of Al-Qaryatan on August 5th. Among the 230 people kidnapped, 60 of them are said to be Christians. Now, tens of thousands of people across both Syria and Iraq are believed to have been abducted by the militants over the course of the last few years. Well, the United Nations Security Council has adopted a draft resolution which calls for an investigation into the chlorine gas attacks in Syria. The 15 members of the council unanimously agreed to set up a panel commissioned to identify those behind the sporadic use of chemical weapons in that war-torn country. The resolution asks the UN Secretary General, in coordination with the head of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or the OPCW, to submit recommendations for the establishment of an investigative body within 20 days' time.
The mechanism will gather evidence aimed at identifying the individuals and entities that have a hand in such attacks, and it will do all it can to name those individuals or entities. Now, we all know that we currently lack an effective mechanism for holding criminally accountable those responsible. But when the day comes that we have one, and that day will come, the evidence gathered by the Joint Investigative Mechanism will stand as a record not just of what has been done, but of who has done it.
The question of who used chlorine is still unanswered, partly because the existing mechanisms of the UNOPCW do not have a mandate to identify those participating in such acts. Moreover, we became witnesses of the many politicized statements in this regard, which were clearly meant to be propaganda. It was necessary to eliminate this gap, which was done with the adoption of today's resolution, creating the preconditions for launching a joint mission of the UN and the OPCW. The government of the Syrian Arab Republic affirmed to this council and the Executive Council of the OPCW several times its condemnation of the use of chemical weapons or weapons of mass destruction by anyone, anywhere. And I recall in this regard that the Syrian government and army have never used chemical weapons, and they will never use chemical weapons. Syrian civilians were targeted with the use of toxic chemicals and chemical weapons, including chlorine gas, by armed terrorist groups led by Daesh and the Al-Nusra Front.
Let's get some analysis on what all this means, and for that we can turn to Caleb Maupin. He's a journalist and youth organizer with the International Action Center, joining us from New York. Caleb, in your view, does this resolution reflect a realization perhaps on the part of the West that supporting foreign-backed militants is backfired, or is this another attempt to pressure Damascus?
Well, I believe that the statements that were made this morning by Samantha Power and other officials are really designed to play in Western media and play on the false and the just blatantly false statement that the Syrian government is using chemical weapons. And that's not the case. It's been overwhelmingly shown that the Syrian government has not used chemical weapons.
So, Caleb, if that is the case indeed, why go through this charade all over again? I'm sorry to cut you off there, but we've seen this play out back in 2013. It didn't go very well for the Americans. Why try going down this road again?
Anything they can do to play up the idea that Syria, the Syrian government, is responsible for the crisis in the country is a propaganda tactic that they will utilize at this time. Just yesterday, a State Department spokesman said that Bashar Assad is, quote, the root of all evil in Syria. Now, that's just insanity. And in fact, the chemical weapons that have been used in Syria, they've been used by the U.S. and Saudi-backed insurgents. Carla Del Ponte from the United Nations has confirmed that they've been using sarin nerve gas, they've been using chlorine. It is the forces backed and supported by the United States, by Saudi Arabia, by Turkey, and by Jordan that are engaging in this crime against humanity. However, any effort they can make in order to demonize the Syrian government, they will make. Now, this resolution that was passed was based on kind of last-minute negotiations that took place between the United States and Russia. And it's likely that the U.S. was trying to get something even more hostile to the Syrian government through. But when Bashar Jafari spoke to the Security Council this morning, he reiterated so many times, he said that so many times they have taken evidence to the Security Council showing that the foreign-backed terrorists are using chemical weapons, and there hasn't been any concern. However, when the allegation is raised against the Syrian government and when that false accusation is raised, all of a sudden the international community, or I shouldn't say the international community, I should say that the forces aligned and directed by the United States, those forces suddenly become concerned about chemical weapons, even though their allies have been using them against Syrian civilians for the longest time in an effort to bring down the Syrian government.
The Russians and the Chinese, they're not directed by the United States. Why do you think they signed on to this resolution?
Well, I think they signed on to it based on understanding that it was about investigating who was actually to blame for these chemical attacks. It wasn't simply trying to further attack and isolate the Syrian government. This resolution creates an entity which will be able to actually determine, or at least try to determine, who is responsible for these attacks. And if that can be established, if it can be established who's actually to blame, that could lead toward a step forward in the situation in Syria. But this is a very dangerous situation in the country. Barack Obama has authorized airstrikes against the Syrian government already. I mean, that's on the table. I mean, the situation in Syria is escalating very rapidly. And I think that leaders of the United States are kind of doing their best at trying to pressure both Russia and Iran to abandon Syria. I think that's their hope with these negotiations. Also raised this morning at the UN, there was the allegation, unproven, that the leader of the Revolutionary Guard was in Moscow. That was raised, and there was an attempt to kind of demonize Iran and Russia for allegedly violating a travel ban. So they're trying to do everything they can at the last minute to heighten the situation. We've already heard that Chuck Schumer, leader of the Democratic Party in the Senate here in the U.S., has opposed the deal with Iran. So even though it looks like there was a possibility of a deal being signed, the possibility of the situation kind of calming down, now we're seeing all kinds of things go in a far different direction.
Yeah, certainly seems like a lot of uncertainty still left in the air there. Caleb Maupin, a journalist and youth organizer. Thanks for joining us, Caleb. Well, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, almost 250,000 people have been killed in Syria's conflict since it broke out in March of 2011. The Britain-based group documented the deaths of over 240,000 people, up from its tally of more than 230,000 announced in June 9th. This is how it breaks down. The latest death toll shows that almost 12,000 children were among the 71,781 civilians killed in Syria. Now, the Monitor put the death toll for the militants at 42,384, adding that more than 34,000 foreign fighters were also killed. The identity of over 3,000 people killed in that conflict still remains unknown. Well, at least one person has been killed and 3 others wounded in an attack by unidentified gunmen on the Iranian bus traveling in eastern Turkey. Turkey's official news agency attributed that assault to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or the PKK. Now, the attack comes amid rising tensions across Turkey. Here, in the southeast of the country, at least 3 people have reportedly been killed in fresh clashes between supporters of the PKK and security forces. Ankara launched a military campaign against the Kurdish group last month in both northern Iraq and Turkey.
The police must withdraw immediately and tension must be lowered. People are on the street. We are concerned that the number of dead and wounded will rise. If that happens, it will spread to other cities across the country.
Well, amid the ongoing Saudi bombardment, Yemen's humanitarian crisis is worsening by the day. Now there is growing concern over international aid ships being diverted to areas controlled by the remnants of the old regime.
The death toll from the Saudi-led military campaign against Yemen is continuing to rise. At least 5 civilians lost their lives when Saudi fighter jets struck a medical facility, as well as a school in the Hais district of the western province of Hodeidah. Elsewhere in the northwestern Sada province, airstrikes claimed the lives of at least 2 people. Saudi warplanes also conducted air raids in the provinces of Hajjah and Amran. The loss of civilian lives comes as fear in the capital Sana'a is mounting after aid ships were diverted to areas under the control of militias loyal to the fugitive government of Abd Rabbo Mansour Hadi.
Now that they are diverting the ships to the port of Aden, people in northern Sana'a and its surroundings are worried. Areas like Amran and Tamar, what will their fate be? People are scared. Children, women, men, and families. What will their future entail? They are starving the capital, Sana'a, and the Yemeni people. The coalition countries are surrounding us and starving us. But we are one people. We don't have a problem with each other. They should allow the port of Aden to operate and the port of Hodeidah to operate and import foodstuffs to all the citizens so they can eat.
Last month, the United Nations declared Yemen as the highest level humanitarian emergency on its scale, with the Saudi bombardment claiming the lives of at least 4,021 people.
You're watching the Al-Ittijah English News Bulletin, still to come on tonight's program. The Afghan capital is rocked by a series of deadly blasts, killing over a dozen people. Anti-government protesters in Bahrain have once again taken to the streets, calling for the immediate release of the country's opposition leader Sheikh Ali Salman. Following Friday prayers, demonstrators held a rally in a village southeast of the capital, Manama, demanding the release of Salman, who heads Bahrain's main opposition bloc, the Al-Wifaq National Islamic Society. Now in June, Sheikh Salman was sentenced to a 4-year prison term over insulting the Interior Ministry and inciting others to break the law. The trial, however, has been dismissed by international rights groups as being politically motivated. The Manama regime has jailed thousands of pro-democracy activists since the start of the 2011 popular uprising. Well, a series of deadly explosions have rocked the Afghan capital, Kabul. According to security sources, a suicide bomber, detonated his explosive vest at the entrance of Kabul's police academy. The blast comes only hours after a massive truck bomb rocked eastern Kabul, killing 15 people and injuring more than 400 others.
As a result of last night's cowardly attack, 240 of our citizens were wounded, including 47 women and 33 children, and 15 of our countrymen were martyred.
At least 8 people were killed and close to 200 wounded when a truck bomb exploded in Kabul early Friday morning. Police said the powerful blast happened near an army compound in a heavily populated area. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack. Houses and shops were reduced to rubble. Cars parked at least 100 meters away were damaged. Some of the wounded were being treated at a hospital. After the blast, my house collapsed, this person said. I don't know what happened next. Police say the death toll could rise as people are feared buried in the wreckage of collapsed buildings. Smaller magnet bombs or suicide attacks have become a weekly occurrence in the heavily fortified capital, but large truck bombs have rarely penetrated the city's outskirts.
And now time to recap our top stories. Iraq's top religious authority calls on the country's premier to brave tough reforms as protests over government corruption escalate. The UN Security Council adopts a resolution to help identify and punish the perpetrators behind chemical weapons attacks in Syria. And the Daesh terror group abducts over 230 people in Syria's Homs province. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time. For now, goodbye and thanks for watching.